Hi, I'm Jason Gorber from thatshelf.com, and I just saw Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, J.J. Abrams' final chapter in the Skywalker, what is it, non-trilogy? The 9-film series that we've sort of, we've grown up with, we've experienced, and are finally coming to the end. Look, I went into this with the appropriate level of sort of trepidation and excitement. J.J. Abrams is not somebody who's known for actually sticking a landing, and this film absolutely came with a whole bunch of baggage, not only in terms of what came before, but J.J.'s own career, where he sets stuff up and lets people sort of play in his playground. He's really good at that, which is why I'm absolutely unapologetically one of those fans of the stuff that Rian Johnson did with the last film, where he sort of took what J.J. had set up and really sort of messed about with it, played with our expectations, toyed around with notions of some of the more metaphysical elements of what constitutes the Star Wars films. And now here we are with the 9th film of the series. Everything's got to come together. It's got to serve so many masters. It has to bring the series to a close. It has to bring our characters that we've grown up with, but also the ones that were introduced by JJ, to some sort of catharsis, and it all has to come in a way which general audiences will also respond to. And on that level, I think it succeeds tremendously. I think it does exactly what they want it to do, and because of that, it's a little bit less interesting for people like me that wanted something a little bit more sort of out there. I like the universe getting bigger. I like the whole notion that this stuff actually gets more and more complicated, and that doesn't always work for blockbuster cinema. Sometimes things have to be simplified, brought down, brought under control, and the repetition sort of kicks in. This absolutely, if Force Awakens owed almost everything to the original New Hope with a little bit of Return of the Jedi, this owes a lot to Return of the Jedi with a little bit of New Hope, a tiny bit of Episode 3, but not very much, and really rehashing many of the things that we've actually sort of taken for granted about what the Star Wars elements actually are. Because of that, it feels a bit frustrating sometimes. It feels like every moment that you think that you're actually going to get some sort of twist, which is super interesting and has consequences, actually has like dramatic consequences. When we see our characters do something completely unexpected, the rug's pulled off under our feet. And again, this is a typical JJ thing, is that he sets up something super complicated and you think, oh my God, it's going to be this, and then it ends up being that. There's certain key things that you can probably predict having not seen the film, and there's certain things that I really hoped for that didn't come to pass. And I don't mean hope for in the sense that I think the character should do this. No, I hope to be truly surprised. I hope to be truly moved by certain emotional beats as they're set up. And that didn't really come to pass as much as I would have liked it to. It's a perfectly fine film. It's also a pretty good Star Wars film. It's less interesting what you could actually do with this, but that's okay, because on a fundamental level, and I mean this with all humility, this film's not designed for me. I kind of got my other film. In some ways, Rogue One was the film. In some ways, Mandalorian is the show that I always wanted. I always wanted to mess around with this sort of the references, the Kurosawas of this world, the samurai and the westerns and all this stuff, like just go in a totally different direction, not necessarily with characters that we know. The so-called Baby Yoda, I'm actually less interested than I am in that, in a weird way, than sort of the Mandalorian culture. I mean, that's just the expansion, the taking the core of what Lucas's narrative was and finding bigger and bigger stories to tell within the sort of same context, and hopefully drawing some of, again, that metaphysical element. Look, when I saw Star Wars when I was 5 years old, it was the Force that really captivated me. There were laser blasts, and there was Darth Vader, and there's good versus evil. There's the whole notion of the interconnectedness, about this understanding that we had this thing that sort of united us. What inevitably happened was Star Wars itself, back in the day anyway, really helped unite a lot of people. It really became a cultural touchstone. And as things get more and more fragmented, we have very few of these things that actually, whether love it or hate it, it's still something that everyone kind of talks about. And this film absolutely, completely sort of takes that, but doesn't necessarily comment on it in the way that The Last Jedi did, but just embraces it and just does, I guess the common term is fan service. There's a lot of checkboxing here, a lot of things like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we did this finally? And they do that. Or wouldn't it be nice if we introduced this person, because that would make happen. There's a couple things in this that if you go in completely cold, again, won't necessarily be a surprise, but will be a pleasant sort of arrival. And the way that they've actually dealt with the narrative, the way that they've actually structured it, I think is about, look, they've all written themselves into a corner and they didn't necessarily know where to go. JJ left all these, oh my God, what are we going to do? Ryan picked it up and said, okay, we're going to break everything down. We're going to get super meta. We're going to reflect upon what the whole notion of all this stuff is. We're going to leave you in a position where almost anybody, that the Force is not patrilineal or matrilineal. It is not something, it gets away from the notions of these people who are born to be great. And in some ways, without giving anything away, in some ways this film sort of plays with that structure in ways that I think are less interesting than opening it up and making it something that reflects upon that very notion. Look, we can go on about midichlorians in the prequel episodes, but that whole notion was always something that was being confronted. It always seemed like it was something that there was going to be more there. And I'm not quite sure that we ever picked up any of those pieces. All that stuff was pretty much rejected, and what we're left with is a very straightforward but very entertaining Star Wars film. And God bless, this is what Disney's going to want. This is what general audiences who are going to go see it are going to want. Nobody's going to be, I don't think this is a film to be angry about because there's not that much to be angry about. There's nothing to really confront with people's expectations of what they're getting. And again, as a movie fan, that's slightly less interesting. As a Star Wars fan, well, it's pretty much what I expected. I've seen this before. I've seen it with Return of the Jedi. I've seen it with a bunch of the other films that do this closure so that it feels that you've actually ridden the ride and you get out and you feel that you've actually taken place on this journey. Because of that, it feels much more like the end of episodic television than it does the end of a saga, a true cinematic saga. It doesn't feel that we've really sort of been lifted up by the ending. It feels like the ending has just cleaned up all the stuff that had been laid out before. That may frustrate people, that may excite people. I leave it up to you. Anyway, long story short is that we have a whole bunch of characters that you know, a few new ones that don't really seem to connect nearly as well as we want. We have a couple running jokes that fall pretty flat. We have a couple that are kind of fun and interesting. We have some new creatures that are invented. We have some old ships that are repurposed. And we have some old characters that actually reappear. I mean, it's no surprise that somebody like Lando shows up. But again, it's all, the film does stuff, look, serials did this all the time, but the film does stuff like, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of this, and then, woo, surprise, something pretty powerful happens. And you think, oh my God, we're finally having major consequences. We're having things that cannot be undone. And of course, the film finds a way to actually sort of walk these things back. I would have loved it if actually that stuff, because that's the stuff that matters. It's when things actually bad happen, and then they have to deal with it, and they have to confront it. And that's, for me, what's a little bit frustrating about this film. I mean, this is a totally different saga, but the Avengers, when they, people get hypnotized, and they start doing bad things, and people get shot. Wouldn't it be interesting if a major character like a Nick Fury got killed under the auspices of being whatever it was, under mind control? That's a different kind of comic book movie, but comic books do that all the time, that the people who actually die never really die, the people who are actually there never really come back. And of course in Star Wars, we got Force Ghosts. We do this as well, but there's still a different tone, a different way of doing it, of making sure that the sacrifices are truly sacrifices. And I think that this film sort of dances around that in a way which is much more comic book and much less Star Wars. There's a slight tonal difference than, again, not necessarily my expectations, but something that I would have encouraged the filmmakers to actually run with. There's certain characters that after a while, we love them, but they don't necessarily need to be in the film anymore. The ultimate example, of course, was Harrison Ford, who never wanted to come back after Empire Strikes Back, but that's a whole nother story. Here we have a long, rambling way of saying, I think most people are going to be really happy with this film. I'm not sure this film will stand alone as something that people cherish as the film that really sort of knocks their socks off. Visually it's quite stunning, but we are really, yet again, retreading stuff that really feels comfortable, and I would have liked to have, frankly, felt a little bit more uncomfortable. I would have loved all these debates that we had last film, all these crazy arguments about, well, this film doesn't do what we want it to do. I love that. That's what it's all about, is that sort of, that dynamic of push-pull, of actually caring enough to worry what it's going to be. This is not a film that ruined your childhood. In many ways, it's a film that resurrects your childhood. And because of that, I think it'll be perfectly fine. Anyway, there's my initial take on this. We'll probably have much more to say on the spoiler take, but for right now, I hope you do enjoy the film. Please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us a lot. Follow us on social, at that shelf, and we'll see you next time. All the best, and I guess may the Schwartz be with you, something like that. Take care.